The champagne glass shattered against the marble floor when I heard what the man in the black suit had to say. Minutes earlier, my entire family had been laughing at me for being the family failure. Now, I was holding documents that would destroy everything they'd built. Hello, friends. Before we dive into today's story, please help me grow this channel by subscribing, sharing this video with others, and don't forget to hit that like button. Now, let's get started with our story. My name is Garrett Whitmore, and until an hour ago I was the family disappointment, the teacher, the one who threw away his inheritance to grade papers and deal with teenagers. At 28, I made $52,000 a year while my brother Preston pulled in 7 figures. My mother, Vivian Whitmore, never let me forget it. She had this way of introducing me at parties that made my career sound like a terminal illness. This is Garrett, our youngest. He teaches. Then she'd pause, letting the weight of that statement sink in before adding, public school. My father, Douglas Whitmore, built our family's company from what he claimed was nothing but determination and a $5,000 loan. Whitmore Industries now controlled $60 million in assets, with contracts spanning from Boston to Bangkok, and Preston, my older brother by 3 years, had just been crowned the heir to the empire. The golden child was finally getting his throne, but standing in that driveway holding papers that trembled in my November-numbed fingers, I realized everything I'd believed about my family was built on a lie bigger than any of their success stories. The man in the black suit, Harrison Cross, had just handed me proof that changed everything. The failure son, the disappointment, the teacher who couldn't cut it in business. I'd been the owner of Whitmore Industries for 3 months and didn't even know it. The sound of that breaking champagne glass still echoes in my memory because it marked the exact moment the Whitmore family empire started to crumble, and I was the one holding the hammer. The Whitmore family Thanksgiving was never just about turkey and gratitude. It was an annual performance review disguised as a holiday, where your worth was measured in profit margins and your place at the table literally depended on your tax bracket. I pulled up to my parents' estate at exactly 4:00, knowing that being even 5 minutes late would trigger a lecture about punctuality being the foundation of success. The house sprawled across 3 acres of manicured Connecticut landscape, all brick and glass and architectural ego. Every window glowed with warm light that looked inviting from the outside, but felt cold once you stepped through the door. My Honda Civic coughed twice before dying in the driveway, surrounded by luxury vehicles that cost more than most people's mortgages. Preston's white Tesla Model S sat in the prime spot, of course, polished to a shine that seemed to mock my dusty windshield. Mom's black Mercedes, Dad's vintage Bentley, and a collection of BMWs and Audis belonging to various relatives filled the circular drive like an automotive show of force. Garrett's here. My cousin Bethy's voice carried through the foyer as I walked in. She said it the way you'd announce a minor inconvenience, like rain at a picnic. The teacher made it. Bethany worked for a pharmaceutical company doing something with marketing that she claimed saved lives but really just inflated prices. She had this practiced smile that never reached her eyes, and a husband named Theodore, who laughed too loud at his own jokes about tax brackets. The house smelled like roasted turkey and expensive perfume, underscored by the leather and bourbon scent that seemed permanently embedded in the walls. Family photos lined the hallway, a chronological display of Whitmore achievements. Preston's Harvard graduation, his first day as vice president, the ribbon cutting at the new Singapore office. My photos got progressively smaller each year until the most recent family portrait, where I was partially hidden behind a decorative vase. Preston stood by the marble fireplace in the great room, holding court with our uncles about quarterly projections and market expansions. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost 3 months of my teaching salary, his wedding ring catching the light as he gestured through some story about crushing a competitor. The key is leverage, he was saying to Uncle Vernon, who nodded along despite running a failing chain of mattress stores. You find their weakness, apply pressure, and wait for them to break. My father sat in his leather wingback chair, the one no one else was allowed to use, bourbon in hand, and Wall Street Journal folded beside him. He acknowledged me with a nod that lasted exactly 1 second before returning his attention to Preston's monologue. Douglas Whitmore had perfected the art of making you feel invisible while looking right at you. My sister Chloe waved from across the room, the only genuine greeting I'd received. She was a cardiac surgeon at Mount Sinai, saving actual lives while Preston moved numbers around spreadsheets. But even her success was somehow secondary to Preston's, because medicine was noble, but business was power, at least according to our mother. And there was Mom, Vivian Whitmore, orchestrating the entire production like a conductor with an iron baton. She moved through the room in her cream-colored dress, adjusting flowers that didn't need adjusting, straightening pictures that were already straight, making sure everyone knew their place in the family hierarchy. "Garrett," she said, not quite looking at me, "you're in your usual spot by the kitchen door. We need easy access for the servers. The servers, not our helpers or the catering staff. The servers, like they were hardware instead of humans." "Good to see you too, Mom," I said. But she was already moving on, critiquing cousin Roland's tie choice even though he managed $1 billion hedge fund. I made my way through the room, past Aunt Patricia discussing her latest charity board appointment and Uncle Jerome pontificating about yacht maintenance. Each conversation was a competition, every anecdote a subtle flex of wealth or influence. "How's the teaching going?" Uncle Vernon asked, the way you'd ask someone about their chronic illness. "It's great, actually. One of my students just got into Columbia with a full scholarship." "Columbia," he repeated, then took a long sip of his whiskey. "Well, at least someone in your orbit is going places." The dining room had been set with the Waterford crystal and the silver that supposedly came over on the Mayflower, though I suspected Mom bought it at an estate sale in the 90s. 20 place settings for 18 people because abundance was the Whitmore way, even in emptiness. This was my family. This was my Thanksgiving. And in 30 minutes, it would all go to hell. Dinner started with Dad's traditional toast. But something felt different this year. He stood slowly, deliberately, tapping his crystal glass with the silver spoon until the room fell silent. The light from the chandelier caught his face at an angle that made him look older, more tired than I'd noticed before. "Family," he began, his voice carrying that boardroom authority he never turned off. "For 30 years I've built Whitmore Industries from a single warehouse in Newark to an international logistics empire. Tonight I'm announcing the next chapter." Preston straightened in his chair, trying to look surprised, even though I could tell he already knew what was coming. Mom placed her hand over her heart and practiced anticipation. "Effective Monday morning, I'm stepping down as CEO," Dad continued, his eyes fixed on Preston. "My son Preston will be taking the helm of Whitmore Industries." The board voted unanimously yesterday. The room erupted in applause. Preston stood, that practiced smile spreading across his face like oil on water. "Thank you, Dad. I promise to honor everything you've built and take it even further. We're projecting 40% growth over the next 2 years." To Preston, Uncle Jerome raised his glass. "The next generation of Whitmore excellence." Everyone drank except me. The champagne turned bitter in my mouth. Mom rose from her chair, her glass held high. To Preston, who unlike some people understands what it means to be a Whitmore, who understood that family means building something together, not running away to play savior in some classroom. She looked directly at me on those last words. The entire table turned to follow her gaze. Uncle Vernon, 3 drinks deep and lacking his usual filter, decided to stir the pot. "Hold on, Vivian. Shouldn't both sons have had a shot at the company? I mean, Garrett's smart enough. He graduated summa cum laude. From state school," Mom corrected sharply. "With a degree in history. What exactly would he contribute to a logistics empire? Knowledge about the Napoleonic Wars?" A few uncomfortable chuckles rippled through the room. "I chose a different path," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "There's nothing wrong with teaching." "Different," Mom laughed, but it was the laugh she used to cut people down to size. That's one word for it. "Garrett made his choice 5 years ago. He wanted to be noble, to make a difference. Tell us, son, how much difference does $47,000 a year make?" $52,000, I corrected. "Oh, excuse me. $52,000. Preston's last bonus was more than you'll make in a decade." Preston leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine. "Come on, Mom. Let's not turn this into a comparison. We all make our choices." "Yes, we do." Mom continued, her voice gaining momentum. Some choose greatness, others choose mediocrity. Garrett had every opportunity. The best schools, the best connections, a guaranteed position in the company. And he threw it all away to teach teenagers who sleep through his lectures. They don't all sleep through them, I said quietly. One of his students got into Columbia, Chloe offered, trying to help. Mom waved her hand dismissively. One student, Preston, just secured a contract that will employ 300 people. That's impact. That's legacy. I stood up, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor, the sound cutting through the room like a blade. You know what? I have something to say. Sit down, Mom commanded, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. You're just a failure. Garrett. A disappointment who threw away everything we offered. You to play hero in some public school. You have nothing to say that anyone at this table wants to hear. The words hung in the air, like a toxic cloud. Even Preston looked uncomfortable, studying his wine glass with sudden intensity. You're an embarrassment, she continued, standing now to her fury building. Do you know what I tell people when they ask about you? I tell them you're finding yourself because saying my son is a public school teacher making poverty wages is too humiliating. Vivian, Dad said quietly. But she wasn't done. No, Douglas, he needs to hear this. Every year we gather here and pretend Garrett isn't the family failure. Well, I'm tired of pretending. You could have been somebody. You could have been standing where Preston is standing. Instead, you're nobody. Just like I always knew you'd be. The silence that followed was deafening. Aunt Patricia studied her napkin. Uncle Vernon reached for another drink. Chloe looked like she wanted to say something, but couldn't find the words. You're right, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm exactly who you think I am. Excuse me? I walked out, leaving my family to their celebration of success, never imagining that in 10 minutes, everything they believed about power, wealth, and family would come crashing down. I walked out through the grand foyer, past the family photos that charted my gradual disappearance from the Whitmore narrative. The November air hit my face like cold water, sharp and clarifying. My hands were shaking, but not from the cold. On years of trying to prove myself to people who had already written my story. And for what? To be publicly humiliated at what should have been a family celebration? The gravel crunched under my feet as I walked toward my car, each step feeling like a small act of rebellion. My Honda Civic sat there like a faithful friend, rust spots and all, wedged between Preston's Tesla and Mom's Mercedes like a dandelion in a rose garden. The metaphor wasn't lost on me. I fumbled for my keys, dropping them once before managing to get them out of my pocket. The party continued inside, muffled laughter drifting through the windows. They'd probably already moved on, toasting Preston's success while my empty chair went unnoticed. Garrett Whitmore. I turned to find a man standing 10 feet behind me, having appeared without a sound despite the gravel driveway. He was maybe 55, with silver hair that caught the light from the house, wearing a black suit that made him look like he'd stepped out of a different world entirely. Everything about him suggested precision, from his polished shoes to the way he held a leather briefcase that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Who's asking? I said, exhausted from the evening's humiliation and not in the mood for whatever this was. My name is Harrison Cross. I'm an attorney with Cross and Associates. He glanced at the house, then back at me, his expression unreadable. I've been trying to reach you for 3 months, but your family has been quite effective at intercepting my communications. Look, if this is about some lawsuit or debt collection, this really isn't the time, and it's not. He took a step closer, and I could see his face more clearly now. There was something in his eyes that looked like sympathy, or maybe understanding. Your grandfather, William Whitmore, left specific instructions that this be delivered to you and only you on your 28th birthday. That was 3 months ago. My grandfather, Grandpa Will, who died when I was 10, leaving behind memories of peppermint candies and stories about building model trains in his workshop. That's impossible. Grandpa Will died 18 years ago. Yes, he did, and he knew exactly what your family would become. Harrison's expression shifted, becoming more serious, more urgent. Mr. Whitmore, I need you to understand something. I've been practicing law for 30 years. I've executed hundreds of wills. I've never seen anything like this. He held out the briefcase, and something about the moment felt pivotal, like standing at a crossroads where one path led back to my car and my small apartment and my ordinary life, and the other led somewhere I couldn't yet imagine. "What's in it?" I asked. "The truth," Harrison said simply. "The truth your family has spent considerable effort keeping from you. Your father knows I've been trying to contact you. He's had his lawyers send cease and desist letters. He's threatened to bury my firm in litigation. But your grandfather was very specific about the conditions of delivery, and today those conditions have been..." "First, what conditions?" "You had to be 28. You had to have worked outside the family business for at least 5 years. And he paused, glancing back at the house. "You had to be rejected by them completely. Your grandfather called it the moment of clarity." My mind was racing. How could he possibly know what would happen tonight? Harrison's smile was sad and knowing because he knew his son. He knew what Douglas would become, what Vivian would enable. He watched it happening even before you were born. Your grandfather was many things. Mr. Whitmore, but naive wasn't one of them. I looked at the briefcase, its black leather surface reflecting the porch lights from the house. "And if I don't take it, then you go back to your life and things continue as they are. Your family continues to treat you as they always have. The truth remains buried, and your grandfather's final wish goes unfulfilled. His final wish to give you what he called the ultimate teaching moment." Harrison extended the briefcase again. He said, "You'd understand what that meant." I thought about Grandpa Will, about the hours we'd spent in his workshop while Preston was at business camp and Chloe was at medical seminars. He taught me to build things with my hands, to find value in work that produced something real. "They kept the truth from you long enough," Harrison said, his voice cutting through my memories. I took the briefcase. I opened the briefcase right there in the driveway, using my phone's flashlight to illuminate the contents. The first document was a handwritten letter on cream-colored paper, the kind Grandpa Will always used for important correspondence. My hands trembled as I recognized his precise cursive writing. "Dear Garrett, if you're reading this, you've reached 28, and your family has shown you who they really are. By now, they've probably told you you're a failure, a disappointment, someone who threw away greatness for mediocrity. Good. Let them think that. The truth is far more interesting. The company your father claims he built from nothing. I funded every penny of it. That $5,000 loan he talks about was actually $5 million, and it came with conditions he's hidden for 25 years. Whitmore Industries was never his. He was meant to be a caretaker, nothing more." I looked up at Harrison, who nodded for me to keep reading. "I retained 51% ownership through a shell company in Delaware called WQW Holdings. Your father knows this. He's been forging my signature on documents for years, hoping no one would ever check. But I've been dead for 18 years. So I suppose I can't complain about identity theft. The ownership was always meant to skip a generation and go to you. Not Preston, not Chloe, you. Because even when you were 8 years old, you were the only one who visited me in the hospital because you wanted to hear my stories, not because you wanted to be in my will." Harrison handed me another document, this one bearing official seals and legal stamps. "This is a certificate of ownership for WQW Holdings, which controls 51% of Whitmore Industries. As of your 28th birthday 3 months ago, you became the majority owner. Every decision your father and brother have made since then has been illegal without your consent." "This can't be real," I said, my mind struggling to process what I was reading. "Your grandfather was very clever," Harrison explained. "He structured it so that you couldn't inherit until you'd proven you could succeed outside the family business. Years minimum," he specified. "You've been teaching for 6 years." I kept reading Grandpa Will's letter. Your father will deny this. He'll say I was senile, that the documents are forged. That's why I've included recordings of every conversation where he acknowledged the true ownership structure. Harrison has copies in a safety deposit box along with 30 years of documentation. Watched your father become everything I despised. Greedy, cruel, willing to step on anyone to climb higher. I watched your mother encourage it, feed it, celebrate it, but you, Garrett, you were different. You chose to teach, to build rather than destroy, to lift others up rather than tear them down. The company is worth approximately $60 million now. It's yours to do with as you see fit. But remember, wealth is just a tool. It's what you build with it that matters. I pulled out my phone and called Preston. He answered on the second ring, irritation clear in his voice. What? Garrett? Mom's in the middle of her toast to my success. I need you, Mom and Dad, to come outside right now. Are you having some kind of breakdown? Just come outside, bring Dad especially. They emerged 2 minutes later, Mom still holding her wine glass, Dad looking annoyed, Preston checking his phone. What's this about? Mom demanded. If you're having some sort of episode because of what was said inside, frankly, you needed to hear it. Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore, Harrison interrupted, stepping into the light. I'm Harrison Cross, executor of William Whitmore's estate. Dad's face went white. I'd never seen him look afraid before, but fear was exactly what I saw in his eyes. That's not possible, Dad said. My father's estate was settled 18 years ago. The public estate? Yes, Harrison replied calmly. But not the private trust. Not WQW Holdings. Mom's wine glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the driveway. The sound echoed in the sudden silence. Preston laughed nervously. This is a joke, right? Some kind of prank? I held up the certificate. 51% ownership of Whitmore Industries, controlling interest. Every vote, every decision, every contract you've signed in the last 3 months is void without my approval. You're lying, Dad said. But his voice cracked. Call your lawyer, Harrison suggested. Ask him about WQW Holdings. Ask him why he's been sending me threatening letters for 3 months. Preston pulled out his phone, probably to do just that, but Dad stopped him with a raised hand. Don't, Dad said quietly. It's real. The admission hung in the air like a confession. Mom stared at Dad, then at me, her mouth opening and closing without sound. For the first time in my life, Vivian Whitmore was speechless. Months later, I stood in the same dining room where my family had humiliated me. But everything had changed. The pretentious oil paintings of dead Whitmore ancestors were gone, replaced with photos of our employees at company picnics, charity builds, and holiday parties. The mahogany table that could seat 20 had been donated to a local shelter and replaced with something simple but elegant that actually felt like a place where people could have real conversations. Preston was in Thailand now, finding himself with the severance package I'd given him. $2 million more than he deserved, but enough to keep him from filing lawsuits. He sent me an email last week. Just 2 words. I'm sorry. I haven't responded yet. Maybe I will. Maybe I won't. Mom and Dad moved to their house in Florida permanently. They still had millions in personal assets. They just didn't have control anymore. Dad tried to fight the ownership transfer for exactly 3 days before his own lawyers told him he'd end up in federal prison for fraud if he pushed it. Mom hasn't spoken to me since that night in the driveway. She walked past me at a charity event last month like I was invisible, which was ironic considering I was the one writing the check that kept the charity running. Chloe was the only family member who stayed in contact. She called me the morning after Thanksgiving, crying and apologizing for not standing up for me all those years. You know they'll never forgive you, she said over coffee last week. They never forgave me for being myself either, I replied. At least now I'm not trying to earn their approval. The company transformation had been remarkable. I kept all 800 employees and gave them something my father never had: respect. We raised the minimum salary to $70,000 a year, implemented profit sharing, and started a scholarship program for employees' kids. Denise from accounting, who'd been passed over for promotion 17 times, was now our COO. She told me it was the first time in 15 years she'd seen people excited to come to work. Your grandfather would be proud, she said during our Monday morning meeting. He used to bring donuts for the warehouse workers every Friday. Your dad stopped that tradition the day after the funeral. I brought back the donuts. Profits were down 8%, but productivity was up 20%. Turns out people work harder when they feel valued. Who would have thought? Preston's big Singapore expansion that he toasted at Thanksgiving. I canceled it and used the money to upgrade our workers' health insurance to full family coverage. I still taught one class at the high school, AP History, on Tuesday mornings. The principal offered to name a building after me when she found out about my inheritance. I declined. The kids didn't need to know their teacher was worth $60 million. They just needed someone who showed up and cared about their futures. Harrison Cross became more than just a lawyer. He became the grandfather figure I'd lost 18 years ago. We had dinner once a month and he'd tell me stories about Grandpa Will that my family had never shared. He predicted everything. Harrison told me over steaks last night. Even your mother dropping the wine glass. He said she'd drop it the moment she realized her power was an illusion. He understood them better than they understood themselves. The letter from Grandpa Will sits framed on my office wall now, right next to a photo of him and me building model trains. But there's one part of the letter I never shared with anyone else, the part that explained everything. Garrett, your family will call you a failure for choosing to teach. Let them, because every student you inspire, every life you change, every mind you open is a success they'll never understand. Money rebuilds itself. Companies rise and fall. But a great teacher builds futures. That's why the company is yours. Not because you'll run it better than Preston, though you will, but because you understand that success without purpose is just expensive failure. The briefcase Harrison gave me that night sits in my office as a reminder that sometimes the truth takes time to surface, but when it does, it changes everything. That inheritance isn't just about money. It's about the freedom to define success for yourself. And that the best revenge against those who called you a failure is to succeed on your own terms. Every Thanksgiving now, I host dinner at the company headquarters for any employee who doesn't have family nearby or who needs a place where they're valued for who they are, not what they earn. Last year we had 300 people. We toast to second chances, to teachers who become CEOs, and to Grandpa Will, who saw potential where others saw disappointment because in the end, they kept the truth from me long enough. But truth, like a good teacher, always finds a way to make its lesson heard. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear that success isn't always what it seems. Drop a comment below about a time when someone underestimated you, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories about families, secrets, and the moments that change.